In an era where political conversations often spiral into shouting matches and viral soundbites, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett's measured response stood out, not just for what she said, but for how she said it. When she was interrupted and told, "Sit down, girl," during a high-stakes, nationally televised discussion, the moment could have easily escalated. Many in her position might have reacted with visible frustration or raised voices, but Crockett didn't. She didn't lean into the confrontation. Instead, she leaned into clarity, composure, and conviction. She paused, gathered herself, and responded not in anger, but with calm authority. Her reply, "Mr. Trump, I was elected to stand for my district, for the Constitution, and for every girl who's ever been told to sit down instead of speak up," was brief, deliberate, and profoundly effective. It was a moment where the power of tone outshone the volume of noise. No dramatics, no escalation, just words chosen carefully and delivered with calm precision. The strength of her response wasn't in its sharpness, but in its control. That tone did more than make a point, it set a standard. It reminded viewers that assertiveness doesn't always have to come wrapped in anger or defensiveness. In fact, what made her answer resonate wasn't just the message itself, but the way she maintained her dignity in the face of condescension. She didn't allow herself to be pulled into a combative back and forth. Instead, she elevated the moment with a kind of restraint that felt strategic rather than submissive. That approach created a ripple effect. Many who watched the clip later noted how rare it is to see a public figure, especially a woman of color, the urge to match disrespect. With immediate confrontation, there's often a pressure, especially in political spaces, to prove strength through volume. But Crockett proved that tone can carry strength too. In her case, it carried more asterisk. Social media buzzed with comments pointing out how refreshing it was to see someone remain composed while still defending themselves with clarity and purpose. Her reply didn't just push back on the words directed at her, it reframed the whole exchange. She made it about more than her. She made it about representation, about what it means to be elected, to serve, and to refuse to be diminished. That moment also spoke to the changing expectations of leadership. In past decades, political figures were often praised for being fiery, aggressive, or even combative in the face of opposition. But there's a growing appreciation for those who demonstrate strength through thoughtfulness, who don't mistake volume for impact. Crockett modeled that shift in real time, and in doing so, gained recognition not just for what she stood against, but for how she stood her ground. What's also worth noting is the subtle but powerful message her tone sent to viewers, especially to younger women watching. Her reaction showed that you don't have to yell to be heard, and you don't have to retaliate to command respect. That's a message that carries weight, particularly for those who are often told to temper their voice or shrink in the presence of authority. By responding with grace under pressure, she provided a real-life example of how strength and composure can coexist. In political commentary that followed, analysts pointed out that Crockett's reply resonated precisely because it didn't feed into the chaos, it cut through it. Where so many political moments disappear into the endless churn of outrage and reaction, hers lingered. The calm way she addressed the situation forced people to listen closely, to pay attention not just to what was said, but how it was said, why it mattered. In the end, the exchange wasn't about who won or lost a debate. It became about a different kind of leadership, one that isn't defined by dominating the room, but by owning the moment with presence, poise, and an unshakable sense of self. Her voice didn't need to be loud, it just needed to be clear, and it was. Language, especially in the political arena, is never just language. Every word chosen, every phrase used carries meaning that stretches far beyond the immediate moment. When Donald Trump looked at Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett and said, "Sit down, girl," it wasn't just an offhand remark. It was a statement loaded with historical weight, cultural implications, and social consequences. Whether intentional or not, the choice of words tapped into a long and painful legacy of dismissive language directed at women, particularly women of color, in positions of authority. The phrase, "sit down," girl struck a nerve because it echoed sentiments that many women, especially black women, have faced for generations, being belittled, patronized, or dismissed simply for speaking with conviction. The word girl in that context wasn't neutral. It wasn't friendly or casual. It diminished her role, her title, and her standing. Jasmine Crockett is a U.S. Congresswoman. She was elected to represent the voices of thousands of Americans. To refer to her as girl, especially while telling her to sit down, carried the unmistakable tone of condescension. It signaled a refusal to recognize her authority, and by extension, the authority of women like her. Asterisk, this kind of language is powerful not because of the volume it's delivered in, but because of the structures it represents. It reminded many viewers of moments in their own lives where they were talked over, dismissed, or patronized it for what they said, but simply for who they were. For black women in particular, being called girl in a professional or political setting isn't just a slip of the tongue. It reflects a wider societal habit of undermining their status, regardless of credentials, accomplishments, or elected office. Asterisk, when the clip circulated online, many viewers didn't even focus on the political debate at hand. They focused on that one sentence, because the language used revealed something deeper than policy disagreements. It revealed attitudes. The phrasing turned a policy exchange into something personal, reflective of power dynamics that go well beyond party lines. And it was a moment that made people uncomfortable, not because it was loud or angry, but because it laid bare an ongoing issue that often hides in plain sight. How language can be used to subtly or not so subtly strip away respect. Asterisk, Crockett's decision to respond the way she did, without raising her voice, without resorting to insults, was a direct counter to the language used against her. She reclaimed the space she had just been pushed out of, not by shouting, but by reminding the room who she was and who she represented. By stating, "I was elected to stand for my district, for the Constitution, and for every girl who's ever been told to sit down instead of speak up," she didn't just respond to one man's words. She addressed a pattern. Asterisk, her reply became about more than herself. It was about visibility and dignity, about refusing to let dismissive language define the moment. And it worked, not because she tried to match tone with tone, but because she let the contrast speak for itself. His language was rooted in control and dismissal. Hers was rooted in responsibility and leadership. Asterisk, this moment also reminded many people that language isn't neutral, especially from public figures. Words set the tone for how people are perceived and treated. What someone in power says can either elevate or diminish those around them. And when someone chooses language that minimizes others, it doesn't just affect one conversation, it sends a message. In this case, that message didn't go unnoticed. In fact, it became the story. Asterisk, media outlets, commentators, and everyday citizens alike reacted not just to the fact that a controversial phrase was used, but to what it revealed. It exposed how even in 2025, language continues to reflect unequal power dynamics in politics. The phrase, "sit down girl," became a flashpoint not for being outrageous on its surface, but for being so familiar to so many women who have experienced the same tone in boardrooms, classrooms, and political spaces. Asterisk, what Jasmine Crockett did in response was quietly powerful. She didn't let the language define her moment. She redefined it. By addressing the words directly and then rising above them, she shifted the focus from insult to impact, from an attempt to silence to a reaffirmation of why she's in that room to begin with. And in doing so, she reminded everyone watching that words matter, and how we choose to respond to them matters even more. The public reaction to the exchange between Donald Trump and Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett revealed just how divided American audiences continue to be, not just politically, but emotionally and culturally. When Trump told Crockett to sit down girl, it triggered an immediate wave of responses across television networks, social media platforms, and even everyday conversations in homes and workplaces. But what stood out was not just the reaction itself, was the contrast in how people interpreted the moment. For some, it was a moment of blunt, unscripted talk. For others, it was a line that crossed into outright disrespect. Asterisk, Trump's supporters were quick to defend his choice of words. Many argued that he was simply doing what he's known for, being direct, off the cuff, and unfiltered. They pointed to his long-standing style of communication, often described as telling it like it is, and viewed his comment as part of that same persona. In their eyes, there was no deeper meaning in calling Crockett girl. It was just a way to cut through political correctness and push back on what they saw as political grandstanding. They praised him for staying tough and not allowing the conversation to be dominated by what they viewed as identity politics. Asterisk, on the other hand, many saw the moment very differently. For critics and a large portion of independent observers, Trump's remark wasn't just informal, it was belittling. And when directed at a black woman serving in Congress, the phrase took on added weight. It wasn't just about being dismissive, it was about who was being dismissed and why. The use of the word girl struck a chord, especially among women who are all too familiar with being called something other than their name or title in professional settings. For them, it was not a harmless comment, but a reminder of how power is sometimes used to undercut credibility and identity. Asterisk, this division in interpretation made the moment all the more significant. It wasn't just a viral clip, it was a mirror reflecting how differently Americans see the same event. In online debates, some argued that the focus on the language was overblown, a distraction from real political issues. Others insisted that the way public figures communicate, especially those with influence, matters deeply, because when language diminishes someone, especially someone in public service, it sends a broader message about who deserves respect and who doesn't. Asterisk, the response to Crockett's reply was similarly split. Among her supporters, her calm, pointed answer was celebrated as a masterclass in handling disrespect without losing control. She didn't need to shout to make her point. She didn't walk away or back down. Her words delivered in a firm, composed tone resonated with people who have faced similar dismissals but never had a national stage on which to respond. To them, she spoke not just for herself, but for a wider community of individuals who are often told to sit down when they attempt to speak up. Asterisk, however, not everyone viewed her response positively. Some accused her of playing the victim or trying to manufacture outrage for attention. There were also those who dismissed the entire exchange as political theater, one more moment in a long list of partisan clashes that have little impact on actual policy. This skepticism was evident in some media circles and social commentary that treated the incident as more of a meme than a meaningful moment. Asterisk, but even among those who dismissed the emotional weight of the exchange, few could deny that it had an impact. News networks replayed the clip multiple times. Headlines dissected the tone, the words, and the body language. It became a trending topic not because it was the most dramatic moment of the week, but because it tapped into an underlying tension. The way authority, identity, and respect intersect in American politics. Asterisk. What the response ultimately showed was how every political moment is viewed through a deeply personal lens. For Trump's base, his language was just another example of him being unapologetically himself. For Crockett's supporters, her reply was a long overdue correction to a kind of treatment many know all too well. And for many others, caught somewhere. In the middle, the moment was a reminder that language isn't just about communication, it's about power, recognition, and who gets to define the rules of engagement. Asterisk, that division in public reaction wasn't just predictable, it was revealing. It showed that America still struggles with how to interpret moments that mix race, gender, and power, especially when they unfold on national platforms. The same words heard by millions were understood in drastically different ways. And that difference said just as much as the words themselves. The exchange between Donald Trump and Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett didn't just stay within the walls of a debate stage, it spilled into living rooms, news cycles, classrooms, and social media timelines, sparking a national dialogue that extended far beyond politics. It reminded the country of how moments of conflict, especially those involving gender and racial undertones, often become cultural touchpoints. What began as a sharp interaction between two public figures quickly became a broader discussion about dignity, voice, and the standards we set for how people in power engage with one another. Asterisk, Trump's remark telling Crockett to sit down. Girl may have lasted only a few seconds, but the impact was immediate and wide-reaching. It was discussed not only in political commentary but across media spaces that typically avoid deep political analysis. Morning talk shows, podcasts, and even high school debate forums, used the moment as a springboard to explore questions that have lingered for years. What kind of language is acceptable in political discourse? How do we differentiate between being outspoken and being disrespectful? And why do certain words, when aimed at certain people, carry so much more meaning? In many ways, the moment forced a reckoning with how America views power and who is allowed to speak within it. Crockett wasn't just a congresswoman in that moment. She was a symbol of something larger. She represented the kind of voice that is often underrepresented or talked over in politics. A black woman who had earned her seat at the table, who didn't need permission to speak, and who wasn't going to be silenced by outdated language or patronizing tones. Her measured response, in turn, became part of a national conversation about what leadership looks like when it is both composed and confrontational in a strategic way. Educators and media analysts alike used the moment to highlight how respectful engagement matters, how tone, language, and timing are all part of leadership. College students studying political science examined the exchange as a case study in communication, while advocacy groups held discussions around how public figures influence public perception with even the smallest phrases. The fact that the phrase "sit down, girl" became a centerpiece of so many conversations proved that people were not just paying attention, they were evaluating the deeper implications. The dialogue didn't stop with Crockett's response either. What followed were countless conversations about how women, especially women of color, often challenged not just for their opinions, but for their very presence. Trump's supporters defended his words, suggesting that his comment was just part of his unscripted style, but others argued that style can't be used to excuse disrespect, especially when it reinforces long-standing power imbalances. That discussion helped clarify the line between being candid and being careless with language, especially for those in positions of influence. Beyond gender and race. The moment also sparked broader questions about civility in politics. In a time when discourse often feels divisive and unproductive, Crockett's handling of the situation was seen by many as an example of what it looks like to stand firm without creating unnecessary chaos. Her restraint wasn't just tactical, it was educational. It demonstrated that disagreement doesn't always have to devolve into disruption, and that power can be exercised through presence rather than volume. What made the national conversation even more notable was how personal it became for so many viewers. People reflected on their own experiences of being talked down to, overlooked, or undermined in professional or personal settings. Crockett's calm but clear assertion of her role, her purpose, and her right to speak resonated far beyond the context of that one debate. It was a moment in which many people, especially women, saw themselves and felt seen. The dialogue also extended into spaces not traditionally focused on politics. On platforms like TikTok and Instagram, creators broke down the exchange in everything from casual posts to educational It became a lens through which people could examine how microaggressions work, how professionalism is perceived differently depending on who's speaking, and how the weight of history often sits quietly behind a single sentence. Ultimately, the discussion that followed didn't just center on what Trump said or how Crockett replied. It centered on what kind of political culture the country wants to uphold. Do we want a culture where sharp remarks and personal jabs are normalized, or one where substance and respect shape the conversation? That question, left hanging after the moment passed, continued to echo in commentary and conversation alike. The fact that such a question came out of a single sentence shows just how much meaning language carries in public life, and how one moment can ignite a national reflection far larger than the sum of its parts. The exchange between Donald Trump and Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, brief though it was, became more than just a political clash. It was a cultural flashpoint. At its surface, it was a verbal interruption in the middle of a policy discussion, but in its impact, it exposed deep undercurrents in American society surrounding power, identity, respect, and the ongoing evolution of public discourse. It revealed the continued tension over how we speak to one another, particularly when the dynamics of race, gender, and political authority intersect. Crockett's poised and intentional response served not only as a personal stand but also as a broader message to many who have experienced similar treatment. She didn't escalate, she didn't retaliate with insult. Instead, she chose language that was inclusive, rooted in purpose, and reflective of her role as an elected leader. In doing so, she turned a dismissive moment into a unifying one, reminding audiences that true leadership isn't measured in volume or bravado, but in clarity, composure, and conviction. The public's divided reaction illustrated just how fractured the national conversation still is, where some saw strength, others saw overreaction. Where some recognized a historical pattern being replayed in real time, others dismissed it as harmless political sparring. But the fact that the moment prompted widespread discussion across media, political commentary, classrooms, and social networks shows that it touched something real. It wasn't just about two individuals on a stage. It was about the language we accept, the power we challenge, and the dignity we demand. Asterisk in a political culture that often rewards outrage and sound bites. This moment offered a different kind of lesson. It showed that how something is said can be just as important as what is said. That respect, even in disagreement, can carry more power than the sharpest insult. And that those who face the weight of dismissiveness, especially women and marginalized communities, are not just capable of responding, but of redefining the conversation altogether. Asterisk, as the clip continues to circulate and be referenced, it becomes clear that this wasn't just a fleeting incident. It was a reminder that words have weight, that tone reveals intent, and that sometimes a single calm sentence can echo louder than a shouted command. What Jasmine Crockett did on that stage wasn't just defend herself. She represented a broader standard for public discourse, one that's long overdue, and one that many hope becomes the new norm.